And a very good morning, everyone. I am Lisa Lord, and this is a media briefing to deal with Barbados' preparedness if we do have any potential outbreak of the African swine fever. We will be addressed by the Minister of Agriculture.
Good morning, Barbadians at home and abroad. Good morning to all of our stakeholders and international stakeholders. Pleasant good morning to my Permanent Secretary, Acting, Mr. Michael Wason, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Cheryl Morris-Keat, Chief Agricultural Officer, Keely Holder, and Senior Veterinary Officer, Dr. Mark Trotman. I've come this morning to speak to you about the outbreak of African swine fever. There has been a reported outbreak in Dominican Republic, and this outbreak was reported to the OIE on July 29th, 2021. Having heard about the outbreak and making sure that Barbados is placed in a state of readiness, we at the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security had a meeting with our stakeholders to make sure that we bring everybody on board. And with the Senior Veterinary Officer and the Chief Agricultural Officer and the rest of the team, we got together and prepared a readiness program that puts Barbados in a position to respond should there be an outbreak of the African swine fever in Barbados. I wish to state for the records, however, that in as much as this outbreak is in the Dominican Republic, and this is the first that we've had in the Americas since the 1970s, we are still not in a position where we are totally impacted by it. But we have to prepare ourselves, because once it's in the Americas, then there's every likelihood that it can be moved throughout the region. And the entire region must now mobilize in order that we can protect the livestock subsector and make sure that we prepare Barbadians and put the resilience in place to be able to mitigate any likelihood of an outbreak in Barbados. If there's one thing that I can define Barbadians by, I would have to use the word resilience, because we have had to endure a lot since 2020, when we have been dealing with the first case of COVID-19 in Barbados. But even before 2020, we as a government came to power where we have had to restore an economy, and we've had to bring back resilience to this economy by stabilizing all sectors across the economy. And in as much as there has been disruption, particularly in our tourism sector, which evidently has impacted all other sectors, we have been able to retain the stability in agriculture to the extent that in the last financial year and the last measuring period by the Central Bank of Barbados, we've been able to see growth in the agricultural sector. But nothing is guaranteed and nothing is forever, and the sector itself is also under pressure. And in as much as we are doing our best to make sure that we stabilize the sector, we will be forever impacted by events that will continue to challenge us. Certainly, climate change is one of those events that has been impacting us. And I've spoken on more than one occasion about continuous droughts that has been affecting our crop farmers, and equally about floods that have been affecting our crop farmers. And of course, there are livestock farmers who have been reeling under pressure as it relates to increasing prices of feed, increasing price of water, and certainly the challenges of getting produce to market. We are all aware that I've had to deal with the issue of a glut within the poultry sector, and equally we have had several gluts. So Barbados was never short of locally produced food, be it from livestock or crop. But what stands before us today is a challenge that perhaps presents the greatest challenge for Barbados at this time, and that coupled with the government having to channel its resources to healthcare, then we are faced with a double whammy in that if we are not careful and we are not putting ourselves in a state of readiness to deal with any event of an outbreak of African swine fever, then the pressure on government can be severe. African swine fever can wipe out the entire pork industry, and all of our farmers, especially those who are involved in backyard farming, who may not be reaching the standards that are required are at highest risk. And therefore, it is our business to make sure that we bring Barbados to a state of readiness. My team and I presented to the Cabinet of Barbados on Monday at an emergency cabinet meeting, and we've gone through all the details, including how we're going to tackle this at ports of entry, how we're going to beef up our biosecurity, and how we're going to make changes to our immigration cards facilitating me this morning.
Thank you very much, Minister. We will now go to Dr. Trotman, who will make his presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much. Now, African swine fever is a highly infectious, highly dangerous disease that has spread over the past couple of years all across the world. Up until very recently, the Americas was the only region, only global region that was spared its effects. It has wreaked havoc in many of the countries that it has infected, not only in terms of the killing of the pigs, but also the economic backlash from loss of trade markets, loss of income to farmers, etc. So it is extremely important that we prepare in case it does enter. I first want to make it clear that the disease does not exist in Barbados, and we will do everything in our part to keep it out. The second thing I need to make clear on the outset is that African swine fever affects pigs only. It doesn't affect any other species of animals, and it does not affect people. So it poses no risk to public health, but it does pose a significant risk to the pork industry and to the economic health of the country. So that being said, the Veterinary Services has been monitoring the spread of the virus for the past 2 years and trying to make plans and put things in place to see how best we can address that risk and make sure that we are prepared to in the first instance, keep it out, and if it does enter, to be able to respond rapidly to it. So those preparedness plans have been revolve around 4 basic pillars. First one is to have a number of preparedness plans in place so that we know what we have to do in terms of preventing it and responding to it. We need to work with our border agencies and also work with the traveling public and with the farming community to put into place enhanced biosecurity measures. The third pillar is to make sure that business as usual continues so we can protect the economy, make sure that our pork industry is not threatened. And the fourth pillar of the response or the preparedness is in terms of communication, making sure that we are timely, transparent, and informative with our messages and consistent with our messages, and try to make sure that we address any issues with respect to misinformation, rumors, incorrect information, or even deliberate fake news or deliberate attempts to sabotage our efforts to make sure we have proper plans in place. So those are the 4 pillars that we have around how we're going to respond to African swine fever. The first step is to try and keep it out of the country altogether. So we will be working and have been working with our partners at the borders, the various border agencies, the customs, port health, plant quarantine, veterinary quarantine, all those agencies, commerce, who interact with people and goods coming into the country, to make sure that we have a shield around the country to protect it from coming in. Now, we already have a fairly robust permitting system in place to make sure that commercial imports of pork are screened and that permits are issued, so that we are fairly confident that products coming in commercially are do not carry the virus. We also have a passenger permit system where passengers bringing meat product into the country need to apply for a permit, and this is important because this is we are allowing people to go to supermarkets or go to shops and buy your bacon or your ham and so on and bring them in. So we need to know who is bringing those in so we can make sure that it's screened, make sure that what they are bringing in is safe. There also is a real risk of the informal imports where people may not, either through ignorance or through deliberate action, may bring pork products in with their baggage or through on vessels without declaring it or without having a permit for it. So we need to address that matter through communication, through public awareness, through messaging such as what we're doing right now, so that we can properly make sure that any products coming into the country, any pork products, are safe. They're coming from countries that are free of the disease. They're coming through products that do not carry the risk of the virus, and that we, that we are fairly confident that we keep it out in that way. Another risk factor for bringing product into the country is through what we call international garbage. Garbage on planes, garbage on ships, which may have scraps, pork scraps, bacon scraps, sausage scraps, ham scraps. These are very, very efficient vectors for the virus. So we need to make sure that those products are handled appropriately when they enter the country or when the vessels land in the country. So that whole mechanism is what we call border biosecurity, making sure we have mechanisms in place to keep it out of the country. The second tier of biosecurity is the farm biosecurity, and this is where we have to work with all farmers, whether they be commercial farmers or backyard farmers. Quite often, diseases of this nature enter the country not necessarily through the commercial farms, but through the backyard farms where people are hobbyists and they have a few pigs in their backyards. And they do not have strict protocols for people coming into their backyards, onto their premises, going out of their premises. They move from premises to premises, and this is a major risk if the virus does enter the country. So making sure that backyard farmers and commercial farmers are well apprised or well aware of the risks and what they can do to protect their herd, protect themselves and their livelihoods by simple mechanisms such as not sharing farm equipment, not going from farm to farm unless it's absolutely necessary. If you do, make sure you sanitize your shoes and your hands before you move from farm to farm. If you are selling pigs or moving pigs from one premises to another, make sure that the pigs are isolated for a period of time before they go into your herd to identify any illness or any ill animals that may enter your herd. So these are basic things, and we will be having a meeting with the farmers in very short order to go through these details with them so that they're aware of what they can do. One primary major risk to backyard farmers is the feeding of table scraps and the feeding of swill to pigs. Pigs are omnivores like humans, so they eat what we eat. And they love a piece of bacon. They love a piece of ham. That is one of the worst things you can feed the pigs in this environment, because that can potentially have the virus in it. The virus is resistant to simple cooking methods such as smoking and curing and pickling. So hams, sausages, salamis, those are very much susceptible to being vectors for the virus. Making sure that we keep business going is important. Of course, one of the first, it's almost a knee-jerk reaction that once you hear about an animal disease, sales drop. People are scared. People are worried about the product. So we need to make sure that the farmers and the industry is well apprised of the progression of the disease, well apprised of the risks, so that we at the veterinary services we will be continue to monitor the movement of the virus, and we place controls over imports so that any country that declares the presence of the virus, we will immediately put mechanisms in place to protect our industry. But we also need to make sure that we advocate on the safety of the local pork. As long as the virus is not in the country, first of all, there is no cause for concern. There's no reason to stop eating pork, or even if the virus is in the country. Obviously, any infected farm will be dealt with, and pork from that farm will not get onto the market. But if pork, even if the virus is present, pork is safe to eat, and other animals will not contract the virus. So, making sure that we maintain our economy, making sure we maintain our pork industry is also a critical component of this mechanism. I referred before about communication and making sure that we keep a good handle, making sure that all the messages that go out are consistent, are timely, are transparent. We don't keep anything back, and also that we address any rumors, any false rumors, or any deliberate attempts to warp the messages that are going out. We have seen how fake news and misinformation can really damage the efforts to control any outbreak of anything, and this is no different. So we need to make sure that we have a good, strong communication mechanism to deal with that. We are working assiduously to make sure that we have the capacity to rapidly diagnose the disease, detect it quickly, diagnose it effectively, and respond very quickly should the outbreak comes. So we'll continue to work on this as any further developments. We will make sure that the public is apprised of anything that is important for them to know. If you are traveling, if you are anybody that is bringing any meat products in with them, then make sure they have a permit. We will handle the rest. Make sure they come to the veterinary service and get a permit to bring any products. We'll let you know what products you can bring in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chopman. As we go now to members of the media, I would just like to ask members of the media to introduce themselves and the media house they represent before posing their questions, and also to remind you that the Chief Agricultural Officer is also here to answer any questions you may have.
Hello, good morning.
Yes, go ahead.
Sharia Brathwaite here from the Nation newspaper. I would just like to get an idea of how big the pork industry is, so we could get an idea of what is at stake. Do you guys have an idea of how many registered pork producers there are, and an idea of how many carcasses, the quantity of carcasses we produce annually? How big the pork industry is, so we could get an idea of what is at stake. Do you guys have an idea of how many registered pork producers there are, and
Saul, our chief economist, who's here with us, and he's also our resident statistician. So, Mr. Saul, if you can provide Ms. Brathwaite with the answers to the question.
Good morning.
Right. To answer your question, currently the production of pork carcasses is in the vicinity of 3,500 carcasses annually.
The question was regarding how many pork producers we have, pork farmers.
In terms of the pork farmers, we're not absolutely clear on the amount of pork farmers that there are. I guess persons get in and out of the industries at times. So in terms of registering, a person will register as a livestock farmer and not necessarily as a pig farmer. Thank you.
Good morning, Sharika Griffith from CBC. Can you tell me if Barbados currently has any trade agreements with the Dominican Republic as it relates to pork products? And if so, are we likely to see any ban on such products? And if no, I also am aware that the Dominican Republic has trading agreements with other countries in CARICOM. Could we possibly see a ban on pork products imported from those countries?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. As a member of CARIFORUM, obviously the Dominican Republic is part of our trading network. We do not have any agreement with the DR right now for pork, and any outstanding will obviously be put on hold for the time being. So we do trade it with the DR on other commodities that are not at risk, not with pork. So that rest assured, and also any country that does have an outbreak of African swine fever, it's just a matter of course, because it is pretty much an international standard. We would restrict, temporarily put restrictions on importation. We currently have restrictions on other countries that do have outbreaks of African swine fever. So we're watching the situation quite closely. The DR is very transparent and very forthcoming with their information. So any applications or any plans to import pork from the DR would obviously be put on hold for the time being until they're able to resolve the problem. Okay.
Good morning. Kareem Smith from Barbados today. I just want to continue on from the question that Sharika was asking about CARICOM partners. I'm told that Jamaica is said to have a very close relationship with the Dominican Republic, and as a result, they have been placed on high alert. Is that enough, as far as the ministry is concerned, to warrant restrictions on at least pork products coming out of Jamaica?
No, there's no indication, there's no reason to put restrictions on pork products from Jamaica. Jamaica follows, as Barbados does, the standards of the World Organization for Animal Health. Jamaica is actually a very active member of the OIE. And I am very confident that they have a very robust veterinary services, veterinary department, and a very robust system in pork control systems. And I have a lot of confidence in their ability to do what they need to do, just as much as I have confidence in our ability to do so. I am in constant contact with the chief veterinary officers around the region, including the chief veterinary officer of Jamaica. We meet as a CARICOM group regularly. So any change in that would be obviously be very evident very quickly, but it would not be advisable, it would not be necessary to put restrictions on a country just because they, like we are, putting preventative measures to protect our space from entering. That would actually be counterproductive.
Good morning again. My apologies. I do have a correction to the question in terms of the size of the industry. It's actually an average of 35,000 carcasses per year and not 3,500. My apologies.
Further questions?
What are the symptoms of African swine fever? What should farmers be looking out for?
Okay, well, in veterinary medicine we say signs, not symptoms, but the signs of African swine fever are very varied. It's a very difficult disease to diagnose, especially if it is in its chronic form, as it is in the continent of Africa. But in Barbados, where we have a very naive population of pigs, in other words, none of the pigs or their ancestors have been exposed to this virus for many, many generations. The signs would be what we call peracute. The most classic sign you would see, the farmer would see, is all of his pigs or most of his pigs dead. It would cause acute death in the animals. It would suddenly kill the animals. Those that don't die immediately will show non-specific signs of severe illness. You'll probably see reddening of the skin and the ears, bleeding from the ears, bleeding from some of the orifices, diarrhea, bloody diarrhea, swelling of the limbs. On postmortem, you'll see a lot of hemorrhaging inside the carcass. All of the organs would be bleeding. So it's quite dramatic. But these symptoms are not typical of African swine fever only. So it's important that we have the diagnostic capacity to be able to test for it, because there are other very common diseases, maybe not as explosive and virulent, but there are other very common diseases of pigs that can show one or more of the signs of African swine fever. That's why it's so very important that we are able to detect it quickly and to diagnose it very, 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 very quickly. I just want to add very quickly to the question that was asked about the pig industry and the pork industry. One of the key things that we're trying to get a handle on is the number of pigs and the location of all the pigs. We know the commercial pig farmers. Obviously, we interact with them on a regular basis through the ministry's industry-specific groups. But we don't know where the backyard farmers are, because they don't really play a large role in organized agriculture. So we are trying to identify them, visit them, map them, find out what their challenges are, and give them advice as much as possible on how they can protect their farms. So this is an appeal, I guess, to those who have pigs in their backyards or small holdings, no matter how small. If it's just one pig in a pen, please contact us. Contact the veterinary services so we know who you are, and so we can get that database compiled and know how many pigs there are in the country. Thank you.
Any further questions?
Yeah, I do have another question. It's not related directly to, well, it's not related at all to the African swine flu, but I believe it's sufficiently in the public interest. Over the last few days, we would have had quite a bit of concern among the public about the rising price of poultry. And I'm told that earlier this week, or sometime recently at least, there was a meeting between ministry officials and the producers of feed, and some kind of an agreement was reached. Can the minister give some detail as to what that agreement is?
Yes, Kareem, I would facilitate the question, and thank you for the question. We met on Wednesday, and again, we met with all the stakeholders and Pinnacle as well. You may recall that the proposed increase was 26%, and I tried then to speak to Pinnacle and the new investors in Pinnacle, and we were able to get Pinnacle to move down to a 19%. But the reality of it is that Pinnacle is a private entity that is also carrying increased costs of inputs, and as a support to the small farmers and the livestock subsector, because I don't want the focus of this to be on Pinnacle at all. Pinnacle is a private entity that is free to increase its prices. We as a government, we have a responsibility to the livestock subsector, and therefore anything we do is in support of the livestock farmers of Barbados, and that is where the focus is. The narrative has been around Pinnacle, and that is really not where my focus is at all. My focus is on the livestock farmers of Barbados. So given the fact that Pinnacle, as a business and private entity, considered increasing its prices, we determined as Cabinet that we needed to support our livestock farmers. And we were able then to work with Pinnacle to bring down the price further. So now the price is down to an average 11%. The government initially back in May had put in a price support for the small farmers to help them purchase their feed at a reduced price. And I want to keep the narrative this way because it's about getting the farmers the feed at a reduced price. And that support was by way of $2 million over 3 months to help the farmers purchase the feed at a lower price. And then we've come back now to do an assessment of the situation. Pinnacle has dropped to an average 11%. That means that some feed prices may go up by 3%, some by 5%, some by 8%, etc. And obviously some may go past 11%. And the government has then agreed to continue the support to the livestock farmers by way of helping them to defray the costs of the increased costs in the feed for another 3 months. And we are looking at options then to come back to Cabinet to determine how we can look at a more sustainable approach towards protecting the livestock subsector, simply because we recognize the way the world is trending, everything is going upwards. And I must say to you that we all know that when it comes to increasing prices, and I've said this to the press at River Plantation in St. Philip last week, when it comes to increasing prices, is always, you know, you would find that it's flexible with the prices going up, but it's always sticky to get them come back down. And being cognizant of that, we're looking at programs and options that we can put in place to be able to assist the livestock subsector rather than a reliance on price support.
And just to be clear, that extended support is also to the tune of 2 million?
2 million Barbados dollars, yes.
And my question for you, Mr. Minister, some members of the agricultural sector, some stakeholders, they were concerned that the first price support was not paid. Can you give any surety that Pinnacle received the first price support payment?
There's a payment mechanism for all of this, and we have made that very clear to Pinnacle, and the ministry also has to follow a fairly rigid process as well. All the feed that is sold by Pinnacle has to be reported. All that information has to be captured, reported to the ministry. The ministry then has to do an assessment of it. That assessment obviously then is shared with the Ministry of Finance, and then through the various warrants that are issued by the permanent secretary, we then access funding in order to be able to pay the supplier. What is important really for us is that we are putting in the price support for the farmers. Government will pay, but we have to follow the payment mechanism, because we can't just up and take money and pay without first putting a system in place that guarantees that we are paying for the feed that was sold.
And since we are on the topic of the price increases, some of the dairy farmers had, expressed concern about their farm gate price. And given, as I said, the price increases, no, they wanted to know if they could get an update on the cess that was supposed to be introduced following the importation of the heifers in 2016.
Well, the reality of it is that we are still in the process of discussing whether or not there will be a cess. There are several things that we need to take into consideration. The Chief Agriculture Officer has been working with the Pine Hill Dairy and the dairy farmers for us to come up with a mechanism that would support the dairy farmers. Will it be a cess? We don't know yet. This is still a conversation that we have to have, because a cess will impact also a number of other things that we are trying to protect. Certainly, we want to make sure we get it right. We do recognize that, again, Pine Hill Dairy can be considered a monopoly, since they're the only producer of dairy products in Barbados. And we recognize that our dairy farmers are heavily dependent on them. So we want a synergy that works. And I always try as minister to make sure that we can broker partnerships rather than leave the negotiating table at odds with each other. And that is the reason why we're still in conversation about what will really be the mechanism that we're going to put in place to support the dairy farmers. What I'll do is ask the Chief Agricultural Officer, Ms. Keely Holder, to bring you up to date in terms of where we're going with those conversations, and to address some of the things that we're looking at, so that we will determine if there will in fact be a cess or something else.
Good morning. As it relates to the cess, the Ministry of Agriculture would have met with the representative from Pine Hill Dairy, as well as the president and vice president of Barbados Beef and Dairy Association about 3 weeks ago. We would have discussed how we would move forward with implementing the milk on cess legislation, which was it was enacted, I think, in 2018. So we had some very good discussion, and I think we reached an agreement as for all sides as the way forward. Now the work is to ensure that we put together the necessary information for cabinet. There's some legalese that we have to look at, which has slowed down a little bit our progress in this matter, but we do think that there is a good solution on the horizon, and once we have presented it to cabinet and cabinet has approved, then we'd be better in a position to share it with you.
Are there any follow-up questions?
I have another question, but again, it's off topic, like my colleague Kareem Smith. I just wanted to know if we can get an update on the sugar harvest this year and how Barbados, what did we produce?
Ms. Bradford, I will be more than happy to give you an update, but similar to what I'm doing now, I intend to do with the sugar industry. I'm to meet, first of all, with all the stakeholders this weekend. Equally, I want to meet with the Prime Minister of Barbados to discuss the sugar industry. And then, just like I'm doing here today, we will come back and have that conversation.
If there are no further questions, Minister, would you have any closing comments?
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, I just want to reiterate that the Cabinet approved for us to put Barbados in a state of readiness in case African Swine Fever should reach the region and to reach Barbados. All of the entire region has been put on alert. The Cabinet has agreed that a standing committee be established to address matters as they relate to laboratory equipment, so that we will have the equipment that we need in order to carry out the requisite tests that we may need to carry out. We are also increasing the human resources available to the veterinary services as well, to be able to assist us in carrying out all the field work that we need to do, and equally make sure that we are able to carry out the laboratory work that is required. The public education program has pretty much started. Dr. Trotman is nodding, and we will continue to ramp up that program. The ministry is also collaborating with the Ministry of Information so that public affairs would work with us in making sure that we can get all of the PSAs out. We are certainly increasing our information at the airport, which is the main port of entry, as well as the seaport. So you will see signs when you enter the airport or the seaport, giving information about the African swine fever and what you should and should not do. The Minister of Tourism and International Transport has already confirmed to Cabinet that they have met with immigration, and the field that is to be included on the ED card will be included to ask arriving passengers to indicate whether or not they were on a farm within the last 7 days. And then there's a technical committee on emergency agricultural diseases, which is being established within the ministry. This committee obviously would include the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Ministry of Public Works and Water Resources, representative of the Attorney General's Office, the Ministry of Tourism and International Transport, the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification, the Ministry of Home Affairs, and of course we would also have to have a representative from the Royal Barbados Police Force. That committee is going to be working around the clock to make sure that we get all of this work in, and then we would continue our surveillance presence at the airport, where we will have people on standby just in case we have to do a drill down on passengers who may arrive and are carrying items that they should not be carrying, or equally have been on a farm prior to arriving in Barbados 7 days out. So those are the things that we want to remind the public that we are doing. And we also want to let the public know that there's no African swine fever in Barbados at this point in time, but that being the responsible government that we are making sure we put Barbados in a state of readiness. And with that said, I'm obliged to you, Madam Chair.
As we close, let me just thank you, Minister of Agriculture and Food Security, the Honourable Indar Weir, the Senior Veterinary Officer, Dr. Mark Trotman, the Chief Agricultural Officer, Ms. Keely Holder, and the Acting Chief Economist, Mr. Robert Saul. Members of the media, thank you as well, and you at home for joining. Good morning.
Tremendous struggles last year with the only leg side full tosses.